The atmosphere around the federal courthouse shifted rapidly as new filings and judicial signals began to reshape what many analysts are now calling one of the most consequential legal moments of the modern American political era. According to public information and widely reported court developments, a federal court order effectively freezing key elements of a high-profile legal process involving former President Donald Trump has triggered immediate concern across legal teams, political strategists, and party leadership heading into the 2026 election cycle. This is not simply another courtroom delay. Reports suggest the implications reach far beyond a procedural pause. Analysts indicate the legal freeze touches on timelines, evidentiary review, and potential restrictions that could directly intersect with campaign planning, fundraising, and broader electoral strategy. For Trump's legal team and political allies, the concern is not only what the freeze means now, but how it may shape the months ahead as the United States enters an increasingly volatile election environment. If you value clear, fact-based political analysis without media noise, consider subscribing and stay with me as we break this down step by step. What we know so far begins with the federal court's recent procedural move, widely described in legal reporting as a freeze or pause affecting key aspects of ongoing litigation connected to Trump's broader legal challenges. Public filings show that this freeze is not a final ruling on guilt or innocence, nor is it a dismissal. Instead, it represents a judicial decision to halt certain actions while specific legal questions are addressed at the appellate or procedural level. Official statements confirm that such freezes are not uncommon in complex federal cases, but the timing in this instance has elevated its political significance. According to public court documents and reporting from multiple legal correspondents, the freeze appears tied to disputes over evidentiary standards, jurisdictional questions, and constitutional arguments raised by defense attorneys. Trump's legal team has argued in filings that proceeding under certain conditions could violate established legal protections or create conflicts with ongoing appeals. Prosecutors, meanwhile, have pushed for continued movement toward trial phases, emphasizing the public interest in resolving high-profile cases without extended delay. The result is a legal standoff now temporarily locked in place by federal judicial authority. Analysts indicate that this freeze effectively pauses forward motion on certain procedural tracks, creating uncertainty around scheduling, discovery timelines, and potential pretrial motions. In a typical case, such a pause might pass with limited public attention. But in this instance, with a presidential election cycle already intensifying and Trump remaining a central political figure, the implications are far more complex. To understand the tension surrounding this development, we need to rewind the timeline. Over the past several years, Trump has faced a series of legal challenges across multiple jurisdictions. Some have advanced quickly, while others have moved through slower appellate channels. Each case has carried distinct legal questions, but collectively they have formed a continuous backdrop to his political activities. Public records show that Trump's legal strategy has often involved aggressive appeals, constitutional challenges, and procedural motions designed to test the limits of federal authority and timing. This strategy has produced mixed outcomes. In some instances, courts have allowed proceedings to continue at pace. In others, judges have granted temporary pauses or entertained complex legal arguments that extended timelines. The current freeze, however, arrives at a uniquely sensitive moment. With 2026 political positioning already underway and Trump maintaining influence within the Republican Party, any legal development capable of altering campaign momentum carries heightened weight. According to analysts and political strategists quoted in major outlets, the concern inside Trump's legal circle is twofold. First, there is the immediate question of how long the freeze will remain in effect and what conditions must be met for proceedings to resume. Second, and perhaps more significantly, there is the broader electoral context. If key legal processes remain unresolved deep into the election cycle, the resulting uncertainty could affect everything from debate participation to fundraising dynamics and voter perception. Official statements from Trump's representatives have emphasized confidence in their legal arguments and described the freeze as a necessary step toward ensuring fair proceedings. Public filings show continued assertions that constitutional protections and procedural fairness must remain paramount. At the same time, critics argue that prolonged delays risk undermining public confidence in the legal system's ability to resolve high-profile cases efficiently. This tension between legal process and political timeline is now at the center of the unfolding situation. Analysts indicate that federal courts are traditionally cautious about allowing electoral considerations to influence judicial decisions. However, when a case involves a major political figure actively engaged in national campaigns, the intersection becomes unavoidable. Every procedural move, including freezes and appeals, takes on added significance because of its potential downstream impact on governance and electoral dynamics. Meanwhile, within Washington and across state-level political organizations, strategists are already recalibrating. According to public commentary from GOP insiders and campaign analysts, contingency planning is underway to account for multiple possible legal timelines. Some scenarios involve rapid resolution of outstanding legal questions, while others assume extended uncertainty that could stretch into critical phases of the 2026 cycle. The White House and Democratic leadership are also watching closely. While official statements remain measured, public remarks from administration officials emphasize respect for judicial independence and the importance of allowing legal processes to unfold without political interference. At the same time, Democratic strategists are assessing how prolonged legal battles involving Trump might influence voter engagement, messaging, and broader electoral narratives. For now, the federal court freeze stands as a pivotal moment, one that does not resolve the underlying legal disputes, but instead suspends them in a state of high-stakes uncertainty. Analysts indicate that the coming weeks will likely determine whether this pause remains temporary or evolves into a more prolonged procedural bottleneck. Appellate decisions, judicial reviews, and potential negotiations between legal teams will all shape what happens next. The tension is unmistakable. A single procedural move within the federal judiciary has triggered ripple effects across the political landscape, raising questions about timing, strategy, and the balance between legal accountability and electoral dynamics. As both legal teams and political actors adjust to this new reality, the stakes continue to rise. The escalation following the federal court freeze has been swift and deeply consequential, not only within the legal teams directly involved, but across the broader political and institutional landscape. According to public information and widely reported developments, what initially appeared to be a technical procedural pause has rapidly evolved into a focal point of power dynamics between legal authority, political strategy, and electoral positioning ahead of 2026. Inside Washington, analysts indicate that the immediate response from Trump's legal team has centered on strategic recalibration. Public filings show continued emphasis on constitutional arguments and procedural fairness, with attorneys asserting that the court's decision to freeze certain elements of the case underscores the legitimacy of their legal concerns. Official statements confirm that the defense views the pause not as a setback, but as an opportunity to address what they describe as unresolved legal questions that must be clarified before proceedings can advance. At the same time, the prosecution's position remains firm. According to reporting from multiple legal correspondents, government attorneys have signaled their intention to press forward as soon as the freeze is lifted, emphasizing the public interest in timely resolution. Analysts note that this creates a structural tension within the case, one side seeking careful judicial review of foundational issues, the other pushing for procedural momentum. The result is a legal equilibrium defined by uncertainty, where neither side can fully advance until appellate or judicial clarifications are delivered. This legal standoff is now intersecting directly with political power structures. Within the Republican Party, public commentary from strategists and lawmakers suggests growing concern about how prolonged legal ambiguity could shape internal dynamics. Trump remains a central figure within the GOP, and any development affecting his legal standing inevitably influences party cohesion, candidate positioning, and strategic planning. Analysts indicate that party leadership is quietly assessing multiple scenarios, including the possibility of extended court timelines that overlap with key electoral milestones. The White House, for its part, has maintained a careful distance. Official statements from administration representatives emphasize respect for judicial independence and reiterate that the executive branch does not interfere with ongoing legal proceedings. However, analysts suggest that behind closed doors, senior officials are closely monitoring the situation's potential impact on governance and international perception. When a legal case involving a former president becomes a dominant national narrative, it inevitably shapes diplomatic messaging, economic confidence, and institutional stability. Geopolitical observers also note that allies and adversaries abroad are paying attention. According to foreign policy analysts cited in public commentary, prolonged legal uncertainty surrounding a major U.S. political figure can influence global perceptions of American political stability. NATO partners, in particular, have shown heightened sensitivity to U.S. domestic developments that might affect defense commitments or leadership continuity. While no official statements from allied governments directly link current legal proceedings to policy shifts, analysts indicate that prolonged domestic turbulence can complicate diplomatic coordination. Meanwhile, on Capitol Hill, the situation has intensified existing partisan divides. Congressional Republicans have largely framed the court freeze as evidence that legal processes require careful scrutiny and should not be rushed. Some lawmakers have publicly expressed support for ensuring that constitutional questions receive thorough judicial consideration. Democrats, by contrast, emphasize the importance of resolving high-profile legal cases without undue delay, arguing that prolonged uncertainty can erode public trust. These competing narratives are now shaping legislative messaging, media appearances, and campaign positioning. Strategically, the implications extend into campaign infrastructure. Political consultants and election analysts suggest that uncertainty surrounding legal timelines complicates everything from debate scheduling to advertising strategy. Fundraising dynamics can shift rapidly when major legal developments dominate headlines. Donor confidence, voter enthusiasm, and media framing all respond to perceived momentum or vulnerability. In this environment, a federal court freeze becomes more than a procedural detail. It becomes a variable capable of influencing the broader electoral ecosystem. Analysts also point to the potential for cascading legal effects. If appellate courts take extended time to resolve underlying questions, the freeze could remain in place longer than initially anticipated. Public filings show that appellate review processes can involve multiple stages, including written briefs, oral arguments, and judicial deliberation. Each stage introduces potential delays, particularly in cases involving complex constitutional or jurisdictional issues. Trump's legal team has signaled readiness to pursue all available legal avenues, suggesting that the timeline may extend well beyond initial expectations. This prolonged uncertainty carries strategic risks for all parties involved. For Trump and his allies, extended legal battles could sustain media focus on courtroom developments rather than campaign messaging. For political opponents, unresolved cases may limit the ability to frame definitive narratives around accountability or resolution. For the broader electorate, continuous legal headlines can contribute to fatigue and polarization, complicating efforts to maintain coherent policy debates. If you're still here, you already understand how significant these developments are. Stay with me as we examine what happens next and why it matters. Looking ahead, the next phase will likely be defined by judicial interpretation and procedural maneuvering. Analysts indicate that key appellate decisions could clarify whether the freeze remains narrow and temporary or expands into a broader procedural pause. Public information suggests that both legal teams are preparing for multiple outcomes, including expedited review or extended deliberation. Each possibility carries distinct political and strategic consequences. Future risks extend beyond the immediate case. The precedent set by how federal courts manage high-profile political litigation during an election cycle could influence legal strategy for years to come. If freezes and appeals become standard tools in politically sensitive cases, the balance between judicial caution and timely resolution may face renewed scrutiny. Legal scholars have already begun debating how courts should navigate situations where legal timelines intersect with democratic processes. For now, the situation remains fluid. The federal court freeze has not resolved underlying disputes, but it has intensified the stakes surrounding them. Legal teams are recalibrating, political actors are repositioning, and international observers are watching closely. What began as a procedural decision has evolved into a multidimensional power struggle, with implications reaching far beyond a single courtroom. The deeper consequences of the federal court freeze now extend well beyond the immediate legal framework, shaping the broader trajectory of American political stability, institutional authority, and global perception. According to public information and widely reported developments, analysts across legal and geopolitical circles increasingly view the situation as a defining test of how the United States manages high-profile legal accountability in the middle of an active political cycle. At its core, the freeze has created a prolonged period of uncertainty that affects not only one individual or one case, but the wider balance between judicial process and democratic momentum. Public filings show that unresolved procedural questions continue to move through appellate channels, with no definitive timeline for final resolution. Analysts indicate that this prolonged ambiguity has become a strategic variable in itself, influencing how political actors plan, communicate, and prepare for future developments. Within Trump's legal and political orbit, the immediate priority remains managing risk while maintaining public confidence. Official statements confirm that legal representatives continue to emphasize procedural fairness and constitutional protections as central themes in their defense strategy. According to public commentary from Republican strategists, the freeze is being framed internally as evidence that complex legal questions require careful judicial examination rather than rapid adjudication. This messaging aims to reinforce the perception that legal processes must be insulated from political pressure. However, analysts suggest that extended legal uncertainty also carries structural vulnerabilities. Campaign infrastructure, donor networks, and party leadership must operate in an environment where key legal outcomes remain unresolved. Political consultants indicate that long-term planning becomes more complex when major court decisions could arrive at unpredictable moments. Fundraising strategies, media engagement, and debate preparation all require contingency frameworks capable of adapting to sudden legal developments. On the Democratic side, strategists are evaluating how prolonged courtroom focus may shape voter perception and campaign narratives. Public commentary from Democratic officials continues to emphasize respect for judicial independence while highlighting the importance of accountability and institutional integrity. Analysts note that this dual messaging reflects a broader strategic balance, supporting legal processes without appearing to influence them, while still addressing voter concerns about governance and rule of law. International observers are also closely tracking the situation. According to foreign policy analysts and diplomatic reporting, allies across Europe and Asia view the stability of U.S. legal institutions as a cornerstone of broader geopolitical confidence. While no allied government has issued direct criticism or concern regarding the current freeze, analysts indicate that prolonged domestic legal turbulence can complicate diplomatic signaling. In a global environment already shaped by security tensions, economic competition, and shifting alliances, perceptions of American political stability carry significant weight. NATO partners, in particular, are sensitive to signals of continuity and reliability within U.S. leadership structures. Public information suggests that Allied defense planning and strategic coordination depend heavily on predictable American political processes. While current legal proceedings do not directly alter treaty obligations or defense commitments, analysts indicate that sustained uncertainty around major political figures can influence long-term diplomatic calculations. Adversarial states may also monitor such developments as part of broader assessments of U.S. institutional resilience. Looking ahead, the most significant power shifts may emerge not from any single court decision, but from the cumulative impact of prolonged legal ambiguity. Analysts suggest that if the freeze remains in place for an extended period, it could reshape how future candidates and political organizations approach legal risk. Campaign teams may increasingly integrate legal contingency planning into core strategy, recognizing that judicial timelines can intersect directly with electoral dynamics. This shift could redefine the relationship between legal accountability and political competition for years to come. Future predictions from legal scholars and political analysts vary widely. Some anticipate that appellate courts will eventually deliver clarifying rulings capable of restoring procedural momentum and narrowing the scope of uncertainty. Others warn that complex constitutional questions could require extended deliberation, potentially stretching timelines deeper into the election cycle. Public filings indicate that both legal teams are preparing for prolonged engagement, suggesting that rapid resolution is far from guaranteed. In this evolving environment, public perception will play a critical role. Voter confidence in institutional fairness, judicial independence, and electoral integrity remains a central factor in national stability. Analysts emphasize that transparent communication from courts, legal teams, and political leaders will be essential to maintaining trust. When legal processes involve figures of national prominence, every procedural development carries amplified symbolic weight. The federal court freeze has therefore become more than a technical legal decision. It represents a focal point where law, politics, and global perception intersect. Each subsequent motion, ruling, or statement will contribute to shaping how the United States navigates one of the most complex intersections of legal accountability and democratic competition in recent memory. Power dynamics within Washington continue to evolve as this process unfolds. Republican leadership faces ongoing decisions about how closely to align party strategy with Trump's legal trajectory. Democratic leaders must balance calls for accountability with the need to respect judicial independence. Meanwhile, federal courts operate within their constitutional mandate, insulated from direct political influence, but fully aware of the broader context in which their decisions resonate. The coming months will likely determine whether the current freeze becomes a temporary pause or a defining structural feature of the 2026 political landscape. Analysts indicate that once appellate review reaches key decision points, the resulting rulings could either accelerate proceedings or introduce new layers of procedural complexity. In either scenario, the intersection of law and politics will remain central to national discourse. For clear, in-depth political analysis and global power breakdowns you won't find in mainstream coverage, subscribe to Mr. Alex Crown. Share your perspective in the comments. Serious analysis deserves serious discussion.